What happens when a beloved comedian walks onto a talk show expecting laughs, but ends up in the most uncomfortable exchange of her career? The tension between Leanne Morgan and the hosts of Today with Jenna and Friends became so thick you could cut it with a knife. What started as playful banter quickly spiraled into something nobody saw coming. Before we get into what actually went down, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, telling me what you think about all this, because this story has layers you won't believe. Leanne Morgan walks onto the set with that signature Southern charm everyone knows and loves. She's there to promote her latest comedy special, and the energy in the studio feels light, the usual talk show vibe. Jenna Hager is sitting there with her co-hosts, all smiles as Leanne settles into her seat. The audience is clapping, everything seems normal, but if you watch closely, there's already something slightly off in the air. Jenna starts with what seems like an innocent question. She says, "Leanne, your comedy is so relatable, especially to women in Middle America. Do you ever feel pressured to stay in that lane, or do you want to branch out and maybe tackle some edgier material?" On the surface, that sounds like a standard interview question, right? But the way Jenna emphasizes stay in that lane, there's this subtle undertone that Leanne clearly picks up on. Leanne laughs, but it's not her usual warm laugh. She responds, "Well, I talk about what I know. I talk about my life, my family, my experiences growing up in Tennessee. I don't think that's a lane. I think that's just being authentic. And honestly, I'm not sure what you mean by edgier. Are you saying my material isn't good enough as it is?" You can feel the shift in the room immediately. Jenna freezes for a second, then tries to backtrack. No, that's not what I meant at all," she insists. "I just meant that comedy is evolving, and sometimes people want to hear different perspectives. I was just curious if you felt limited by your audience's expectations." Leanne tilts her head slightly, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Limited? Jenna, I sell out theaters across the country. My audience doesn't limit me. They support me. And I'm not really sure why you're implying that what I do is somehow less than other comedians who curse more or talk about different topics. Funny is funny, and my people seem to think I'm pretty funny." One of the other co-hosts jumps in, trying to ease the tension. "Of course you are, Leanne. We all love your work. I think what Jenna was trying to say is that your comedy has such a specific voice, and we were wondering if you ever feel like exploring outside of that." But Leanne isn't letting this go. She turns to the co-host and says, "You know what? I'm going to be real with you. Every time I come on shows like this, there's always this little hint of condescension when people talk about Southern comedy or clean comedy. Like somehow, because I'm not dropping F-bombs every 5 seconds or talking about topics that make people uncomfortable, what I do is cute or quaint. But let me tell you something. Making people laugh without being vulgar is actually harder. It takes more skill, more creativity, and more connection with your audience." The audience is dead silent now. You could hear a pin drop. Jenna shifts in her seat and says carefully, "Leanne, I really think you're misunderstanding what I was asking. This wasn't meant to be an attack on your comedy." Leanne leans forward. "Then what was it meant to be? Because from where I'm sitting, it sure felt like you were suggesting I should change who I am to fit some kind of modern comedy standard that you think is more valid than what I do." Jenna's face flushes. "I respect your comedy. I really do," she says. "I just think it's an interesting conversation to have about how comedy evolves and whether performers feel they need to evolve with it." That's when Leanne really lets it fly. "Jenna, I've been doing comedy for decades. I've raised 3 kids. I've lived a full life, and I bring all of that to the stage. My comedy isn't stuck in the past. It's rooted in real experiences that millions of people relate to. Just because I don't perform the way you think is evolved doesn't mean I'm behind the times. Maybe what you think is evolution is just a different style, not a better one." The co-hosts exchange nervous glances, clearly unsure how to proceed. Another host tries to lighten the mood. Well, we can all agree that comedy is subjective, right? What makes one person laugh might not work for someone else. Leanne nods. That's exactly my point. So why come at me with questions that imply my comedy needs to be something different? Why not just celebrate what I do instead of trying to push me into some box that makes you more comfortable? Jenna takes a deep breath. Leanne, I think we're talking past each other here. I genuinely was just curious about your creative process and whether you ever think about trying new things. That's all. Leanne sits back in her chair, crossing her arms. You know what? Maybe I am being sensitive, but I've heard variations of this question so many times. It always comes from people who don't really understand the audience I connect with. They think that because we're not in New York or Los Angeles, or because we don't fit some coastal idea of what's hip, that we're somehow less sophisticated, and I'm tired of it. The tension is absolutely palpable now. Jenna clears her throat and says, Leanne, I hear what you're saying, and I apologize if my question came across the wrong way. That genuinely wasn't my intention. Can we maybe start over and talk about your special? But Leanne isn't quite ready to move on. You know what? Let me ask you something, Jenna. When you have other comedians on this show, do you ask them if they feel limited by their style? Do you ask the ones who do political comedy if they ever want to just tell silly jokes? Or is this question reserved specifically for people like me? Jenna looks visibly uncomfortable. I ask different questions based on different guests and their work. I don't have a script where I ask everyone the same things, she explains. Leanne nods slowly. Right. So you chose to ask me specifically about feeling limited, and I'm just trying to understand why that was the angle you wanted to take with me today. Another co-host steps in diplomatically. Leanne, I think we're all just fans of your work and curious about your process. Sometimes questions don't land the way we intend them to, and that's okay. We're all human here. Leanne softens slightly. I appreciate that, I really do. But here's the thing that bothers me. There's this assumption in the entertainment industry that certain types of comedy are more legitimate than others. And I've spent my entire career fighting against that. I've had people tell me I need to be raunchier, I need to be meaner, I need to... But you know what? My audience doesn't want that from me. They want honesty. They want warmth. They want to laugh at the everyday absurdities of life without feeling like they're being preached to or shocked for shock value. Jenna nods and says, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Leanne, your audience clearly loves you. But Leanne isn't satisfied with that response. She says, see, that right there, your audience clearly loves you. Like there's some separate category of people who just don't know any better. My audience is made up of teachers, nurses, parents, grandparents, people who work hard and want to enjoy a night out without being made to feel stupid for finding joy in clean humor. They're not less sophisticated than anyone else's audience. They just have different preferences. The energy in the studio has completely shifted. What was supposed to be a light-hearted segment has turned into a full-blown debate about the validity of different comedy styles. Another co-host tries a different approach. She says, Leanne, I think what's interesting is that you've built such a loyal following by staying true to yourself in an industry that constantly pressures people to change. You've remained authentic. That's admirable. Leanne softens just slightly and says, thank you, and that's all I've ever tried to do. But when I come on shows like this and get asked questions that suggest I should be doing something different, it undermines everything I've built. It sends a message to my audience that what they enjoy isn't good enough. Jenna takes another shot at smoothing things over. Leanne, I promise you that message was never intended. I have so much respect for what you do. Can we talk about some of the stories in your new special? I heard there's a hilarious bit about your mother-in-law. Leanne pauses, seeming to consider whether she wants to let Jenna off the hook. Finally, she says, "Sure, we can talk about that. But I hope you understand why I had to address what just happened. I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just tired of biting my tongue when people make these subtle digs at what I do." Jenna nods quickly and says, "I completely understand. And again, I'm sorry if I offended you. That was never my goal." Leanne smiles faintly and says, "Okay, well, about my mother-in-law," she begins. "So there's this bit in the special where I talk about how she saves everything. And I mean everything. She has margarine containers from 1987. She washes out Ziploc bags and hangs them to dry. She has a drawer full of rubber bands and twist ties that she's collected over the years." The audience starts to laugh a little, and you can feel some of the tension beginning to ease. Jenna smiles and says, "That sounds exactly like my grandmother. Why do you think that generation can't throw anything away?" Leanne grins. "Because they lived through times when you couldn't just run to the store and buy whatever you needed. They had to make things last. My mother-in-law grew up in rural Kentucky, and she tells stories about having to share shoes with her siblings. So now, even though she doesn't need to save every little thing, she can't help herself. It's ingrained in her." One of the co-hosts laughs and says, "My mom is the same way with aluminum foil. She rinses it off and reuses it until it's basically falling apart." Leanne nods enthusiastically. "Yes, exactly. And you can't tell them any different. I tried to buy my mother-in-law a whole set of new food storage containers one year for Christmas, and she looked at me like I'd insulted her. She said, 'What's wrong with what I've got?' And I couldn't even answer that, because technically nothing is wrong with them. They're just from the Carter administration." The audience laughs more freely now, and it seems like maybe the interview is getting back on track. But then Jenna, perhaps trying to prove she understands Leanne's comedy, says something that reignites the tension. "That's so relatable," she says. "I love how you find humor in these simple, everyday moments. It's very wholesome." You can see Leanne's expression change again. She says, "Wholesome. There's that word. You know, I don't think I've ever heard anyone describe a male comedian's work as wholesome. They get called clever or sharp or brilliant. But when it's a woman talking about family and everyday life, it's wholesome." Jenna looks caught off guard. "I meant it as a compliment," she says. Leanne replies, "I know you did. But do you see how even the compliments are diminishing? Wholesome sounds nice, but it also sounds like you're patting me on the head and saying, 'That's cute, dear.' My comedy isn't just wholesome. It's smart. It's observational. It's crafted. I spend hours writing and refining every joke, every story, every punchline. It's not just me standing on stage rambling about my family. It's intentional comedy." The co-hosts exchange uneasy glances, clearly unsure how to respond. One of them says, "Leanne, I don't think anyone here is suggesting your comedy isn't smart or well-crafted. We all recognize the talent it takes to do what you do." Leanne nods, but her tone sharpens. "Then why do the words you choose to describe it always sound like you're talking about something quaint? Why not just say it's funny? Why not say it's brilliant? Why does it have to be wholesome or relatable? Words that make it sound less than." Jenna is visibly flustered now. "Leanne, I feel like no matter what I say at this point, it's going to be wrong. I'm trying to have a conversation with you, and I keep stepping on landmines I didn't even know were there." Leanne takes a deep breath. "And that's exactly the problem, Jenna. The fact that you see them as landmines shows that you know on some level there's an issue here. You know that the way the comedy industry talks about certain performers is problematic, but instead of acknowledging it, you're acting like I'm being oversensitive for pointing it out." Jenna shakes her head. "That's not fair. I'm sitting here trying to apologize, trying to move forward, and you keep bringing us back to this place of conflict. What do you want me to say?" Leanne leans forward. "I want you to actually hear me, not just wait for me to stop talking so you can move on to the next segment. I want you to understand that these microaggressions, these subtle put-downs disguised as compliments, They add up. Every single interview, every single appearance, there's always something. And I'm sure you don't even realize you're doing it, which is almost worse, because it means these biases are so ingrained that they just come out automatically. One of the co-hosts tries to interject, but Leanne holds up her hand. No, let me finish. I've been quiet about this for years because I didn't want to be seen as difficult or ungrateful. But you know what? I've earned my place in this industry. I've worked harder than most people can imagine, and I'm not going to sit here and let my work be diminished anymore. If that makes me difficult, then I guess I'm difficult. The audience is completely silent again. You could hear someone breathing if you listened hard enough. Jenna looks directly at Leanne and says quietly, I don't think you're being difficult. I think you're being honest. And that's making me uncomfortable, because I'm realizing I may have contributed to something I didn't intend to contribute to. Leanne nods. That's the most honest thing you've said since I sat down, and I appreciate that. But uncomfortable is good sometimes. Uncomfortable means you're being forced to examine something you've been able to ignore. Another co-host, who has been mostly quiet until now, speaks up. Leanne, can I ask you something? And I'm genuinely asking because I want to understand. When you talk about these microaggressions, can you give me a specific example of something we could say differently? Leanne considers this. Okay, here's an example. Instead of calling my comedy wholesome, you could call it incisive. Instead of saying it's relatable, you could say it's universal. Instead of asking if I feel limited by my style, you could ask what inspired me to develop such a distinctive voice. Do you see the difference? Those questions and descriptions put me on the same level as any other comedian, instead of in some separate category for people who don't want to be challenged. The co-host nods thoughtfully and says, I do see the difference, and I think that's really valuable feedback. Would you like me to continue the final part where the interview wraps up and the audience reacts afterward? Seats. Jenna says, that's valuable for me to hear. Thank you for explaining that. Leanne softens a bit and says, look, I'm not trying to attack anyone personally. I know you're all good people who probably genuinely love comedy, but the industry as a whole has this hierarchy, and people like me are often put at the bottom of it. We're treated like we're comedy's equivalent of comfort food, nice enough, but not really cuisine, if you know what I mean. Jenna nods. I get that analogy, and I can see how frustrating that must be. But Leanne, you have to understand, I really did just want to have a fun conversation about your work. I didn't come into this with any agenda. Leanne replies, I believe that you didn't think you had an agenda, but intention doesn't erase impact. You can intend something to be harmless and still have it be hurtful. And the responsibility isn't on me to just accept that and move on. The responsibility is on the person who caused the hurt to recognize it and do better. Jenna looks at the camera, then back at Leanne, and says, You're right. You're absolutely right, and I'm sorry. Not sorry that you took it the wrong way, but sorry that I said something that was hurtful, even if I didn't mean it that way. Leanne studies her for a moment. Thank you. That actually means something, but I also need you to understand that this isn't just about this one interview. This is about a pattern I've experienced throughout my entire career, and I'm not going to keep smiling and pretending it's fine anymore. One of the co-hosts adds, and you shouldn't have to. We should all be able to have these conversations even when they're uncomfortable. Especially when they're uncomfortable. Leanne nods. Exactly, because if we can't talk about this stuff, nothing ever changes. The same biases just keep getting perpetuated, and people like me keep getting put in these boxes that don't really fit. Jenna asks, So, where do we go from here? Because I genuinely do want to talk about your special, and I want to do it in a way that respects the work you've put into it. Leanne says, Then ask me about my process. Ask me about how I develop material. Ask me what makes a story work on stage versus one that doesn't. Ask me the same questions you'd ask Jerry Seinfeld or Jim Gaffigan, or any other observational comedian. Don't treat me like I'm in some separate category just because I'm a Southern woman. Jenna takes a breath and says, "Okay, Leanne, can you walk us through your process for developing new material? How do you know when a story is ready to take on stage?" Leanne smiles, a real smile this time. "Now that's a good question. So, I start by just living my life and paying attention to the moments that make me laugh or shake my head. Like recently, I was at the grocery store and saw this woman arguing with the self-checkout machine like it was a person who had personally wronged her. And I thought, that's funny. That's something people do. So, I wrote it down in my phone. Then later I start building around it. Who is this woman? Why is she so angry at a machine? What does that say about how we interact with technology? One of the co-hosts leans in, genuinely interested now. "So, you're building a whole character and context around one moment?" "Exactly," Leanne says. "Because just saying, 'woman yells at self-checkout' isn't funny on its own. But when you build the world around it, when you make people see themselves or their mom or their sister in that moment, that's when it becomes comedy. That's when it connects." Jenna smiles. "That's fascinating. And how long does it typically take you to go from that initial observation to a polished bit?" Leanne replies, "It depends. Some things click right away, and I can have them stage ready in a few days. Other things take months of tweaking and refining. I'll try different versions, different punchlines, different setups. Comedy is rewriting. People think you just get up there and talk, but there's so much work that goes into making it look effortless." Another co-host says, "I think that's something people don't realize. They see the final product and think it just naturally happened that way." Leanne nods. "Right, and that's fine. That's actually the goal, to make it look natural. But I wish more people understood the craft behind it, because when you understand the craft, you respect it more. You stop seeing it as just someone being funny and start seeing it as an art form." Jenna asks, "You mentioned earlier that you've been doing this for decades. How has your comedy evolved over that time?" Leanne considers this. "I think I've gotten more confident in my voice. Early on, I was trying to figure out what worked, what didn't, what felt authentic versus what I thought people wanted to hear. Now I know exactly who I am on stage. I know what stories are mine to tell and which ones aren't. I know how to build a show that takes an audience on a journey." One of the co-hosts says, "That confidence really comes through in your performances. You seem so comfortable on stage, like you're just talking to friends." Leanne smiles. "That's the goal. But let me tell you, it took years to get there. Years of bombing, years of second-guessing myself, years of wondering if I was good enough. And part of what made it harder was constantly being told, either directly or indirectly, that my style wasn't quite right, that I needed to be edgier or dirtier or more political. But I stuck with what felt true to me, and eventually it paid off." Jenna nods. "And clearly your audience appreciates that authenticity. Your tours sell out incredibly fast." "They do," Leanne says, "and I'm grateful every single day for that. But here's what I want people to understand. My success doesn't happen in spite of my style. It happens because of it. There's this massive audience out there that's been underserved for years. People who want to laugh without feeling like they need a shower afterward. And I'm giving them that." Another co-host asks, "Do you think the comedy landscape is changing to be more inclusive of different styles?" Leanne pauses. "I think it's starting to, but we have a long way to go. There are more platforms now, which helps. People can find comedians directly instead of waiting for gatekeepers to decide who's worthy. But the gatekeepers still have a lot of power, and they still tend to elevate certain voices over others. And I think we saw a little bit of that dynamic play out here today, didn't we?" The question hangs in the air, and you can see Jenna processing it. "Yeah," she says softly. "I think we did. And I think it's been an important conversation to have, even though it wasn't comfortable." Leanne nods. Discomfort is where growth happens. If we only ever had comfortable conversations, nothing would ever change. And look, I know I came in hot today. I know I could have been more diplomatic about all of this, but I've been diplomatic for decades, and it hasn't changed anything. Sometimes you have to be loud to be heard. One of the co-hosts says, "I'm glad you were loud today." I think a lot of people needed to hear this. I know I did. Leanne smiles softly. Thank you for saying that. And thank you for being willing to sit in this uncomfortable space with me. That's not easy to do, especially on live television. Jenna nods. Can I ask,